Greetings gamers and welcome to KWKBOX. Today's episode we're going to talk about TV-based video games because I feel that movie-based video games get a lot of attention in forums and online and in different videos, and the TV-based video games really don't get the attention that they deserve. Let's take a look at a few of them together. Everyone from the 80s remembers Gordon Shumway, the alien life form from Melmac. This is the only video game made to honor the immensely popular primetime sitcom that I know of. Apparently Alf's jet scooter has the power to take him back to Melmac, but it's out of gas. Basically, Alf's quest is to walk through his house and around town finding special items that will allow him to find treasure, which he can then sell at a pawn shop to raise money for gasoline that he needs to power his jet scooter so he can return to Melmac. The game combines puzzle, action, and adventure by having you search every nook and cranny of the game world for items. When you find the right items, you'll be able to go to certain locations and begin an action sequence. For instance, Alf needs a swimsuit before exploring the pond. So once he acquires one and comes back to the location, an action sequence starts. If Alf comes out of an action sequence with either a valuable treasure or cold hard cash, he can waltz down Main Street and go to the pawn shop and buy items he may need to complete another sequence. This waltz down Main Street isn't a piece of cake though. There will be detectives trying to capture Alf. If one of the detectives is gaining on Alf, Alf can walk out into the street and get away, but he will have to be very careful not to get run over. This game is very involved, which is why there should have been some form of save feature, or at least a password system. Unfortunately, there is no save feature at all. Once you use up those continues, you have to do everything all over again. Because the game takes a split second to make Alf turn right on the screen, if you want to turn around and walk in a different direction, you have to make sure there are no enemies around you first. You are vulnerable as Alf is turning around for that split second. Alf also isn't very nimble. Jumping will require all of your perseverance to perform. In the end, I think the game had a lot of potential, but just did not get the time and attention it needed. Unless you want to say you have played an Alf video game, there is no reason to try this one out.
He was killed by some bats in the cave in the basement.
Gilligans Island. You know what people like about Gilligan's Island? A lot of things, but particularly Gilligan. You know what the Adventures of Gilligan's Island on NES doesn't let you do? Play as Gilligan. No, the AI does that and somehow makes him dumber than he was on the show. The game is divided into 4 episodes where you'll control Skipper with Gilligan in tow. After learning your main objective through a story sequence, you'll navigate the island trying to complete it. Each of the 4 maps are large but not completely overwhelming either. Bandai also had the good sense to include an in-game map, a feature that some NES classics could have significantly benefited from. The map is very useful since it not only marks the locations of Skipper and Gilligan, but any castaways you've found as well. Before you can solve the gang's bigger problems, such as building shelter before a tropical storm hits, or rescuing your domestic slave Mary Ann from headhunters, the dynamic duo will have to carry out smaller errands first. You get errands when you speak with Mary Ann, the professor, or the Howls. You'll be given jobs like retrieving the professor's stolen communicator from an ornery gorilla, or delivering Mr. Howl his just washed bathing trunks from Mary Ann. Fans of the show will note I didn't mention the skimpy dress wearing movie star Ginger. Strangely, she's missing from the entire game. No doubt Ginger was just too sexy for Nintendo of America. Only one castaway will ask Skipper to help at a time, so you'll need a little luck to stumble upon the right one. Fortunately, the other characters will give you obvious hints as to whom you should go to and see. Sometimes directions to find them also. Unlike the show, the island is a dangerous mass of jungle bursting with homicidal enemies. Cougars and wild boars run back and forth in every direction. Pitfalls lay within an unsuspecting boat captain to fall in, and boulders plummet from the sky with the sole intent to leave passerbys with concussions. Clearly, this isn't the friendliest place on Earth. Luckily, the Skipper does have an attack, a punch. Since there are a few moments in the game where any form of attacking is actually needed, much less effective, a simple dodge and run method is the only requirement throughout much of the adventure. To make things just a bit easier, a few random items are scattered about the island, including extra health in form of bananas, hourglasses which add 1 minute to the timer, and rope to retrieve Gilligan with. Staying with Gilligan is essential in the game. Not only does leaving him behind cause the time limit to plummet, but completing objectives requires forcing your little buddy to do the physical labor, just like in the show. In addition, castaways won't even speak to you without Gilligan because they're preoccupied with the potential trouble he could cause. But having to stick with your first mate isn't the problem, it's trying to get the guy to tag along. Unfortunately, not all the exploration elements are well executed. There's a lot of backtracking just to complete objectives. For example, at one point you'll follow the same route 3 times in a row just to exchange messages and items between Mr. Howell and Mary Ann. To make matters worse, a lot of errands, especially climbing trees, are repeated throughout the game, only with different items to collect, ranging from a wedding ring to Mr. Howell's lost golf ball. In addition, you'll have to partake in unnecessary button mashing to wade through unavoidable quicksand pits and rivers. To make matters worse, you can easily be swept up by rivers and find yourself on another screen far from your intended destination. Gilligans Island has some decent adventure elements like a sizable chunk of game environment to explore, an in-game map, and characters that provide helpful clues. Unfortunately, the terrible hit detection, wonky Gilligan AI, and constant backtracking still make this a bad adventure overall. I recommend sticking with watching reruns of the show instead of playing this one. Home Improvement. The game starts with a momentous occasion on Tool Time when corporate sponsor Binford Tools launches a line of Binford Taylor tools with more power. But as luck would have it, some dastardly fiend has stolen all the tools and haphazardly placed them throughout 4 sets at the television studio. It's now up to Tim to locate every missing crate of tools because apparently Binford didn't mass produce these things, insure them, or have any intention of making any others. You'll control Tim as he searches for the missing crates. Each stage is a massive labyrinth housing 6 or more crates. Home Improvement does have some cool ideas though. Tim always comes equipped with a grappling hook to reach high off ledges, a sledgehammer to smash through cracked walls, and a jackhammer to tunnel under frail platforms. If you would like to know more about items in the game, don't bother looking in the manual because this game went out of its way to not package an instruction manual, but instead a note reading, "Real men don't need instructions." Overall, the level design and mechanics ruin any chance of a positive experience in this game. You're given a strict time limit to fumble around each maze trying to find a path to a crate. Standing still will cause Tim to flex his muscles, while an arrow will point to the direction of a crate, which seems helpful, but it's not. Most of the convoluted paths require you to take lengthy trips, usually in the opposite direction of the arrow, all around the level just to find one hovel containing a crate, meaning following the arrow will usually lead you astray. To make matters worse, platforms tend to be ridiculously tiny, leaving little landing room. In addition, platforms are usually spread out in such poor fashion that you have little room for error. When you jump off a ledge, the game's camera is also erratic. A mid-air turn will cause the screen to jerk sharply and won't be able to see where you're landing. Tim has quite a few weapons at his disposal. Throughout each level you'll come across such realistic tools as a nail gun, a blowtorch, and an enchanted chainsaw that shoots waves of electricity. You'll definitely need them as you face off against the fire-breathing T-Rexes, an egg-dropping pterodactyl, and more. No matter what tool you'll wield, enemies seem to take the same astronomical amount of hits to kill. It doesn't help that after receiving damage, foes will flicker and become invincible for a few seconds, forcing you to a hasty retreat. And the Toolman doesn't take damage well without his far too rare temporary invincibility granting golden hard hat. Home Improvement borrows from Sonic the Hedgehog by axing a health meter in favor of having you collect nuts and bolts to stay alive. Get hit and you'll drop everything, but unlike Sonic's rings, Tim's nuts vanish far too quickly, making a stockpile of 30 dwindle to 2 in a flash. While dying will refill the timer and transport Tim to the last crate he snatched up, losing all 3 of your lives kicks you back to the start of the entire set. So for 5 stages filled to the brim of frustrating hazards, you can only die a scant 3 times. What's worse is there's no password system, thus requiring you to play the entire game all over again. I never did make it to the shocking conclusion of who stole the Binford Taylor tools, but I won't lose sleep over it. The Dukes of Hazzard Racing for Home. The Dukes of Hazzard Racing for Home is the first Dukes of Hazzard game on the PlayStation. While the game is full of charm and stays very true to the show, many things prevent it from being an enjoyable experience. The opening introduction FMV faithfully recreates the TV show's live-action intro pretty well, and the individual cutscenes between missions are decent. However, the characters look like they were made from melted wax. But for the most part, the FMV segments are typical for their time. Unfortunately, there just isn't a whole lot to do in this rural country racer. In the various episodes, you'll drive the General Lee, Daisy's Jeep Dixie, Boss Hogg's Cadillac, Cooter's Wrecker, and other vehicles while collecting power-ups and avoiding or colliding with your competitors depending on the mission. It sounds like fun at first, but then the problems occur. Steering any of the cars or trucks in this game are like trying to pilot a powerboat. You never feel like you're on solid ground or in complete control of the vehicle, and taking corners can be an exercise in frustration. Still, there aren't a lot of turns to negotiate, and you're quite limited in maneuvering by tight guardrails and vegetation. This means that you frequently hit the walls and end up spinning wildly out of control. The gameplay is pretty shallow overall. The game is broken up into 26 different missions ranging from 1.5 minutes to 4 minutes in length. Yes, the game is extremely short and can easily be beaten for the first time in 2 hours. The missions range from collect these, win the race, avoid the police, and ram vehicles until they die. There are power-ups on each level: oil to create a slip and slide trail for anyone on your tail, nitro for a quick boost, and wrenches to fix your car when damaged. There's even a bow and arrow upgrade where one of the Dukes can hang out the window while you drive and then shoot at other cars. Driving the General is fun at first, but control is very loose and feels floaty, so oftentimes slight turns lead to complete spinouts. Going off ramps is also problematic and glitchy. If the car controls were refined a bit, the game could have been much more tolerable. The in-game graphics are average at best. Each environment you drive in literally looks the same, except dirt roads may be black-topped, or a few buildings and ledges will appear. The cars look okay, but the view makes them look like Matchbox cars. There's little variation in terrain throughout the game, and since you can't venture far from the roadway, you'll see pretty much everything there is to see by the time you finish the first few missions. The music is very fitting to the game, but barely noticeable with all the engine noise, crashes, and skidding going on. The game also has the original theme song, which was a must to have in the game. You can get through the entire game in one evening if you select the easy level of difficulty. It's only when you try harder levels that things become more challenging. This game is also featured on the Game Boy Color, and from what I can tell it seems the story is the same, but you race from an isometric point of view and power-ups are used the instant you pick them up. The control is not much better in this version either. Still, the limited depth of gameplay probably won't be enough to entice most gamers. You'll need to be a fan of the show to push through this game. Fans will want to see where the story goes and how each episode ends. Once you've beaten the game, there is not much left for replay value, so most fans probably won't be too interested in revisiting Hazzard County again. Well, those are just a few TV-based video games I have. Let me know what you think about these, and ones that you'd like to see in the future on the channel. Till then, I'll talk to you guys next time. Take it easy.
Hey kids, get your free Mr. Belvedere Fun Kit.
The Mr. Belvedere Fun Kit.
You get an official certificate, an ID card, postcards, an iron-on transfer, a book cover, a newsletter, even a special surprise on your birthday from Mr. Belvedere.
Oh boy! How do we get a fun kit?
Just mail a postcard with your name, address, birth date, and year to Mr. Belvedere Fun Kit, P.O. Box 990, Hollywood, California 90078.